A federal judge dismisses part of the inequality claim by the women's national soccer team. I'm Scott Ott with Bill Whittle now. And Bill, this is a story that we covered some time back when the women's team was complaining that their pay wasn't on the same basis or equivalent to the men's team. And this federal judge, U.S. District Judge R. Gary Klausner, allowed part of a lawsuit to go forward against the governing body of the women's that deals with the women's national soccer team. I think it's just called U.S. Soccer. And he also dismissed part of it. So the part that he allowed to go forward, let me just say this. The team claims that the U.S. Soccer Federation discriminated against them regarding the money spent on commercial airfare, hotel accommodations, and medical and training support services. That is going to go to trial still, and it is scheduled for mid-June in Los Angeles. The part that the judge dismissed, though, Bill, I'd like to ask you about this specifically because it's interesting why he dismissed it. He said basically that he dismissed it because the women's team rejected an offer previously to be paid under the same pay-to-play structure as the men's national team. I'll read from this is coverage on CBSNews.com, but according to the document, or for the 32-page decision from the judge, it said the plaintiffs cannot now retroactively deem their collective bargaining agreement worse than the men's national team by reference to what they would have made had they been paid under the men's national team pay-to-play terms structure when they themselves rejected such a structure. I don't recall, Bill, and maybe I'm just not very good at remembering things, but I don't recall conversation at the time when all the inequality debate was going on that the women's team had explicitly rejected the same kind of deal that the men's had. Did you recall that?
I did not. I did not recall that at all.
And what do you think of this idea? Because basically, here's what the judge was saying. Hang on a second here. They wanted something. Okay, here we go. The women's national team was willing at that time to forego higher bonuses for benefits, such as greater base compensation and the guarantee of a higher number of contracted players. So basically, it sounds to me, as a 100% straight commission salesperson in my other life, it sounds to me like the women's national team wanted a little more stability in their lives, and don't we all? And the men's national team is based more on a kind of benefits paid according to performance.
Mm-hmm.
As far as audience goes.
They're complaining that men are getting paid more because men took a riskier deal and turned out that was a beneficial decision on their part. It doesn't seem to have anything to do with whether or not it was a women's team or the men's team. It seems to me that there was an offer on the table. The men could have rejected it or accepted it. Same for the women. The men took the bigger risk. They got the bigger reward. Now the women are crying about it. This is not what feminism was sold to me as when I was a little kid.
Now, it's still possible that there was discrimination involved in here, or that the court will find that there was discrimination on the other matters we talked about, like airfare and team support and training and stuff like that. But in this particular area, I think that this is one of the things we've talked about before. The idea that equality should be equality of outcome in the sense that everybody makes the same amount without consideration to the factors that go into determining the compensation.
I didn't think they had a case in the beginning, needless to say. Their salary or their compensation, however you want to describe it, or however the compensation is set up, is based on the market. It's based on viewers. It's just that simple. It's like any other compensation in the world is based on performance. And if their numbers are less than the men's numbers, then it's unreasonable to expect them to be compensated the same way. Women's basketball is a perfect example of this. Women basketball players make nothing like what men basketball players make because women's basketball is watched by a fraction of the people that watch male players in the NBA. And this is appropriate. What are we supposed to do about this? This is the kind of cry bullying that you have come to expect from the left. We want everything. We want it our way, and we want it our way now. And if it turns out that there's something that we find unfair, then it is your moral obligation to pay for it until we get it the way we want it. this not only is a surprise in terms of just how bald-faced this crybullying is, but it to me is an indication yet again that somewhere along the line, the original message of feminism as it was presented, where women are fully the equal of men and they are capable of making the same decisions and functioning equally well in the business world and accepting the tough realities of the market and all the rest, seems like yet another case where it's not me saying this, and it's not most of the women I know saying this, but the women who are loudly screaming feminism the most seem to be the ones who are most unwilling, or unable is probably a better word, to deal with the vicissitudes of life out in the world of actual business decisions. They were offered a contract choice. They made a choice. Turns out they chose wrong. They'd still be crying even if they chose right. But like everybody else, they made a decision, and sometimes you win and sometimes you lose. But you never lose when you're a modern feminist, because if you lose, if business decisions cause you to make a decision that would have been more profitable, then the only possible explanation is not that you made a bad decision, but because of sexism in the marketplace, and therefore they will use the courts to make back the money that they didn't make if they'd made a bolder decision.
Bill, do you think that part of the issue here is that everything is based around a capitalistic view of life where profits are the only thing that matter and the inherent dignity of the individual is cast aside in the face of the greed and the lust for more money?
Well, if they were playing in a socialist system, then they would get presumably, we all know how this works, but let's take an example of if this was a Russian team, a Soviet team, for example. If this were a Soviet team, they would be paid the same rate as every other worker in the Soviet Union would be paid. And everybody knows that they would be compensated by being allowed to shop at the better stores that only the elite of the socialist system are allowed to use, and they'd have better access to food and better health care, which also goes to the elite. So as long as they were doing well, making the Soviet socialist system look good, then they would still get paid nothing, but at least they'd get some benefits. So to say that this is somehow degrading, I don't know whether they're all millionaires. I'm sure what's-her-name is undoubtedly a wealthy person now as a result of her ability to play soccer, which is pretty impressive. But her attitude and her appreciation for the country that has made her rich is a little subpar. I'm proud to say, not just happy to say, I'm proud to say I cannot remember her name, and I don't think I could if my life depended on it.
Well, as it turns out, she is quoted all the way at the bottom of this CBS News story, assuming you're talking about U.S. women's national team forward Megan Rapinoe.
That's the one.
And Megan has really been the spearhead of this effort, and she tweeted out in the wake of this ruling from the U.S. District Judge, and I quote, "We will never stop fighting for equality, and we know that equality is important because that word is in all caps."
Well, so far the fight's not going so well, Megan.
And the official comment from the team, by the way, both sides, I mean, she made that kind of vague statement of the fight goes on. The team itself said that the women's national team remains the best in the world and sets the standards for women's soccer. We're committed to continuing that work and to ensure that we can continue to be so. I paraphrase what they said there.
The women's national, go ahead.
Go ahead.
The women's national soccer team, the United States women's national soccer team is the best team in the world? Is that what they said?
No, they were talking about within their league, of course. Let me start from the beginning then. U.S. soccer has long been the world leader for the women's game on and off the field, and we are committed to continuing that work to ensure that our women's national team remains the best in the world and sets the standard for women's soccer. Now, Bill, I know previously you've made the argument that women could not possibly compete with men. They're nowhere near as strong. They're nowhere near as fast, and it's ridiculous to say that men and women are equal. But nobody's making the argument that women should be able to go onto the field and play against men. They're just making the argument that female players should be paid equally with male players.
Well, you've just already made the case that that's a ridiculous proposition. You've already stated in the preposition that women cannot compete with men in terms of one-to-one in an all-male. The U.S. male soccer team.
I'm just repeating what you've said in the past.
I'm saying that they are not on the same league, and everybody knows it, and they know it too. And the only reason that you have women's sports in the Olympics is because if you didn't, there wouldn't be any women in the Olympics, with the exception of sports that require a great deal of precision or things like that. But anything that requires physical strength or speed or anything like that, there just wouldn't be any women in the Olympics, period. So I'm only willing to go this far and be this nasty about this because the U.S. women's soccer team covered themselves with disgrace at the last World Cup. They did win the World Cup, and they showed themselves to be a bunch of ungrateful, nasty, mean-spirited, rotten, spoiled crybabies. So they're not as good as the men's team. A 15-year-old group of boys beat them in a scrimmage, beat them quite severely, as a matter of fact, just for practice. And somehow these women are saying that there's an equality problem because they're not being paid as much as the men's teams are when they've been beaten by a scrimmage squad in Texas or something, some Catholic school or something, beat them 4-1 or 3-1, something like that. So I don't see where you can possibly have any problem with this whatsoever. Now, if it turns out that the women's national team could go out against an American male professional soccer team and beat them, then they'd have a real case. If they were an all-women's team and they were competing in a professional soccer league or in any football league around the world, and they were in competition with men's teams and they were winning let's just say they were doing as well as the worst team in the league, then they'd have a case. So let's see that theory put to the test. And they know they won't put the theory to the test, and we know why they won't put the theory to the test. And so now we know what everybody knows. They're crying about it because it's not fair. And that's just too bad. They are, in fact, well, they were anyway. It changes every year. We don't know what's coming up. But they were the best women's soccer team on the planet when this happened a couple years ago. And whether they will be in the future, I don't know.
What do you think it would take for, let's just keep with soccer because it's something I know least about and don't care about.
But same with me.
Because it's not
it's
American.
Not a real game.
But in any case, I just needed to say something so that we get a lot of comments. So, for example, what do you think it would take to get as much enthusiasm for women's professional soccer as men's soccer? And when you were talking, it made me think of something that does have a lot of enthusiasm, where one group of people cannot compete effectively against another group of people who are playing the same sport but getting compensated much more for it. And that would be college football versus NFL football. And we're talking about legitimate football, not round ball football. This is the ball with the pointy ends. Yeah,
where points are scored and there's an objective.
That's right. So
football.
So
real
on the
football.
one hand, even though the University of Florida, for example, might have a fantastic college football team, if they went up against most of the teams in the NFL, they'd get whooped. And yet, college football is hugely popular.
Mm-hmm. Well, I'm not quite sure I understand the question, but
women's soccer clearly isn't as popular as men's soccer, but college football, where you have a lesser group of people, is immensely popular and generates a huge amount of money, not for the players, but it generates a huge amount of money.
Right. I see what you're saying. Well, I think the reason that college football doesn't do the numbers that pro football does it?
I don't know the numbers, but I just know that across the country,
it's enormously popular.
Saturday,
yes, I don't watch.
Saturday is as beloved as Sunday.
With me, it is the only beloved day. I don't care much for pro football. I like college ball pretty much exclusively. I think the reason you could say there's a difference here, I see where you're trying to set this up. You're saying that men who are playing college football are not playing quite on the level that the pros are, and therefore, how do you explain the fact that it's still popular? It's not that college football is less football than pro football. It's a different kind of football. It is just as an example. By the time you get to the pros, the defensive backs are so much faster that you can't run the kind of explosive offense as a general rule that you can get away with. At least you could get away with Steve Spurrier back in the early 90s and the fun and gun and all the rest of it. when you get to the level of the pros, you are now at the college pyramid consists of hundreds of thousands of players, I would imagine, certainly tens of thousands of players. And as you get higher and higher and higher, and you get into the more advanced leagues, and culminating, of course, in the SEC, which is the league of all leagues, then you get to finer and finer players, and every single one of them, virtually, if they're team leaders, will go into the pros. The best players from college football just go to the pros. They usually go to the pros well before they're finished their 4 years in college. And so what you're seeing is an evolution of excellence. You're watching excellent players who will then eventually go on to become, the top of them anyway, excellent professional football players. You get to watch them a little earlier. And the dynamics of college football, a little more explosive and unusual and riskier, and to me, more fun than pro ball. But you're still watching the best people in the game. And the fact that there is no female football, American football games of any kind, really just buffs the point more than anything. I mean, that is so clearly. I mean, no one questions the fact. Why aren't we watching women's female college football or women's female pro football?
And we're not counting the ones that, what is it, Victoria's Secret does with the underpants and stuff?
No.
Okay.
That's a special case. That's special pleading. The reason we don't see women's professional American football or college football is because it would be ridiculous. That is a game of speed and power. Basketball is primarily a game of speed, but there's nothing like the amount of physical contact and physical damage that's sustained in a pro football or a college football game, or a high school football game for that matter. Look, the answer to this is simple. I hate to be the person who's going back into the ancient archives of our combined human records, but teenage boys are tougher than teenage girls. They're considerably tougher. They can take a lot more abuse. That's what they're built for. And you can imagine a world where teenage women are playing American-style football, but it's not going to be particularly fast or violent or powerful, all the things that make American football worth watching.
I guess I'm just wondering,
I know I'm being left out to dry here, but I don't really much care. Everybody knows I'm telling the truth, and I don't much care what people have to say about it. We know that the reason that women's basketball stars don't get paid as much as male basketball stars is because their game is not as interesting. No matter what the feminists say, it's about, no, it's not so much about power, it's about technique, and it's about, please.
But in soccer, I think you have an interesting case here, Bill, because it's not primarily a physical body-on-body game, although some of that happens. It's right. Speed, it's dexterity, it's footwork.
Yes.
And even though women don't run as fast as men, I think if you're watching a women's soccer game, there's nobody in the stands going, oh, come on, hurry up, get down the field, you slowpokes. I mean, they look like they're moving pretty quick.
This is because soccer is one of the most demasculinized games that there is available. You don't get to use your physical body. You don't get to use physical strength. If you so much as bump a guy, falls down, rolling on the ground. The ambulance comes, and then he touched me and I fell down. Oh, my ankle. Oh, dear God, get a helicopter. Get me off the field. Please. Men don't do that. And so here, I'll just keep digging. I got plenty of room.
I've seen a women's rugby match. In fact, It was the two, we went there because the players that we were interested in were my former Cub Scout den mother and her daughter, her teenage daughter, and they were in this rugby match. And I'm telling you, that was some rugby.
Hey, listen, and I'm so glad you said that, because people listening to this are going to think, geez, I think women's sports are terrible and boring and dull. I don't think any of those things. Athletes are athletes. It is an exceedingly difficult thing to do. It is something that requires enormous dedication, enormous practice, commitment, time, effort, heartbreak, all of it. And women athletes are the match of male athletes in terms of all of the things that goes into the sport. They struggle. They practice. Female gymnastics is probably the best example, I think, where female gymnastics are more impressive than male gymnastics from a sheer aesthetic point of view. And I'm not talking about it being female bodies. I mean, I think female gymnastics is more interesting. And I would pay more money to see that because I think it's more it just appears to be more dangerous and more elegant and more diverse and interesting. But that's a great example, because in gymnastics, you're not really competing against anybody else. You're competing against gravity. And this is kind of the heart of what I'm trying to get at. The only reason I take this belligerent attitude towards is not because I feel any contempt for women athletes. They have my undying respect. Athletics is hard. Anything that's hard that people do and stick to has my enormous respect.
You know, it's interesting
But
in gymnastics.
it's the outcome that matters. And when people try to say that it's not fair, that there's something wrong with society because women soccer players aren't getting paid as much as men soccer players, this is when I have to get up on the high mountain of reason and call down some lightning bolts. It doesn't make me happy to do this, but somebody has to do it.
I think you're right, especially about female gymnastics, because if somebody said to me, hey, we're going to a gymnastics meet Saturday afternoon, you want to come along with us? Really, what kind of gymnastics meet? Well, it's men. They're going to be doing the rings and the parallel bars and some floor exercises. Not as interesting as seeing women do the vaulting. Even men's vaulting isn't as cool as women's vaulting.
Or the beam, the balance
uneven
beam.
parallel bars, the balance beam, the floor
balance
routines
beam
that
is,
women do.
the balance beam to me is impossible, and in addition looks exceedingly dangerous. And I'm in awe of those athletes, in awe of them.
Well,
and
the reason I bring it up is because it looks like it's not that you're right. They're not competing against each other, but they are competing against a standard. Like the judges are evaluating them based on their ability to meet a standard. This move must be done this way. You've got to be tucked in this position. You can't turn your head the wrong way. You can't double step when you land. And that's how they're being judged.
That's correct. It is also correct that there is still a biological difference between the two, that the maneuvers performed by male gymnasts, generally speaking, require a greater amount of total strength. Now, I'm just saying total physical strength. Some of the things that the male gymnasts have to do requires greater upper body strength than what the women have to do, but that's not the point. The point is that what the women gymnasts are doing is they are performing maneuvers that are competing against gravity, and they are performing exactly as you said. They are trying to get a sequence of body motions to be absolutely flawlessly timed and elegantly executed. That's true for men and women's gymnastics, and that's why I think that women's gymnastics is so good an example of this, because it is a question of they're competing against the guy holding the card, right? It's the guy who's going to turn up the 9 or the 10, and that's where the entire drama is, and the art and the interest and all of that stuff. So it's not a question of demeaning female athletes. It's only saying what's obvious, except to people like this who have to make us feel responsible for the fact that they don't get paid as much as men do. And this is why I'm on this particular hobby horse. And it doesn't make me happy to be here, but I'm not going to agree with this premise that it's some institutionalized sexism that causes women on the American soccer team to be paid less. When in point of fact, we don't even know if they would have been paid less if they had taken the same deal as the men, but they didn't. And this is the issue for me. Your revelation that they turned down the deal that the men took, which turned out to be a better deal, but they turned it down because it was riskier. The fact that they can't live with that, I'll just come out and say it. The fact that they're not man enough to live with the fact that they made the wrong decision. You bet the wrong way. Okay, you made the wrong decision. You decided to play it safe, fantastic. They didn't, and they're making more money than you are. Next time, maybe you want to be a little riskier. Maybe you want to be a little bolder, or not. Maybe it would have gone completely the other way. Maybe the men wouldn't have made any money. We don't know. If this pandemic had come in the middle of it and you were assured some kind of salary and they were getting paid for performances and they weren't performing, you would have done better. But it didn't pan out that way. And this constant wailing and crying about how unfair things are and how it's society's fault is stuff that I think people have had enough of. I've had enough of it. And I'm not willing to go along with it. The reason we get into this place in the first place, the reason we have nonsense like this in the first place, is because people have been too polite to simply say what's true. They've just been too nice and too kind, and all we've gotten for our kindness and our consideration and our good manners is to be insulted and to be mocked and have our flag tread on and to be called a bunch of sexists and so on and a bunch of racists and homophobes and misogynists and all the rest of the stuff you want to throw at you. When in point of fact, the only thing I'm advocating is make your decisions and live your life the best way you possibly can and live with the consequences. That's it. I could have made a number of decisions that would have made me considerably wealthier than I am today, a number of them. And that's nobody's fault but mine. There were nobody's choices but mine, and I don't regret any of it. But I certainly don't go around talking as if the world owes me something because I didn't get where I wanted. I think there's a T-shirt. I think this is something that comes out of it's either the Marines or SEAL, somebody like that. And I'll probably mangle it. But it's like, don't complain about the results that you didn't get for the work that you didn't do.
Ladies and gentlemen, we are grateful for the people who work so hard so that they can help to fund this effort at BillWhittle.com. Those are our members. They pay anywhere from about $10 a month to about $50 a month because they want to make sure that this kind of content gets distributed around the world. In addition to the good feeling that they have of being part of this production team, they also have access to some backstage content and to some features that allow them to communicate with each other, encourage one another, engage in civil dialogue, and just kind of talk about the stuff that really matters. If you're not yet a member at BillWhittle.com, that number is growing daily, and we invite you to join the many who are becoming so by going to BillWhittle.com and clicking that Become a Member link. For Bill Whittle, I'm Scott Ott. Thanks for watching.